Hello and welcome to another session on criticism. Let's continue with Dryden. We'll start with dramatic poetry. Now, let's examine Dryden's views on dramatic poesy. Dryden paid attention to drama as well. Theatre was the most influential genre of his time. There were many controversies and also a lot of resistance from the Puritans. The Puritans were against the theatre. The Puritans were against this theatrical excess, too much of sensation, too much of vulgarity. They were against theatrical excess, which, as I was saying, portrayed scenes, bloody and goresome scenes like death and battle and vulgarity and so on. So the Puritans were against it. Dryden countered these charges by stating that there is nothing wrong in portraying such scenes, especially battles and duels. Such scenes, specifically battles and duels, are to be portrayed on the stage, because you know that it is not true. It is you can imitate battles and duels, but Dryden says that death is something that has to be avoided. It can never be imitated, so it was avoided on stage. Okay, so to Dryden, he says that there is nothing wrong in portraying battles and duels, but to him, death should not be presented or portrayed on scene on the stage, because death cannot be imitated. Dryden also crushed the conformity to the three unities as set by the classicists, and also he was against the prejudices against tragic comedy. He was also against the the prejudices of the rigorous enforcement of the principles of decorum. So he says rules can be changed, they can be adapted and adjusted. Unlike Thomas Rhymer, who was his contemporary, and who Thomas Rhymer was a hidebound neo-Aristotelian. Dryden, on the other hand, was a liberalist in his approach. Thomas Rhymer, who was Dryden's contemporary, had denounced Shakespeare. He said Shakespeare is not great because Shakespeare does not adhere to the principles of Aristotle. Dryden seems to have had belief like Longinus and the Romantics in what they believed to be inspiration and inborn creative power of the poet, and therefore Dryden favored the romantic extravagances of Shakespeare. Dryden says there's no harm in Shakespeare not adhering to the principles of Aristotle. Thomas Rhymer was very much against it. He wanted to, the classical period, right? The classical period itself was adhering to principles, adhering to the rules, the neo-Aristotelians. Of course, you will have neo-Aristotelians in the new criticism also, but that is later. But this is the 18th century, the new Aristotelians, or the Augustan period, the neoclassicists as such, Thomas Rhymer. Okay, and he was against Shakespeare because Shakespeare he did not follow, or he did not, Shakespeare refused to fall in line with the principles of Aristotle. But Dryden says it's pretty okay, because Dryden believed in what? Believed in the inborn creative power of the poet, just like the Romantics, just like Longinus. Who's Longinus? Longinus is a Greek-Roman of the Greek-Roman period, Greco-Roman period. He also criticized the ancient Roman and contemporary French drama, which strictly conformed to all the rules. But that doesn't mean that Dryden did not follow the rules, okay? Or he refused to adhere to it. No, that's not it. He, of course, favored regularity. He was also for the rules, but then he was like a liberal. He was not a very strict and stern neoclassicist, or okay. So he was a liberal. Dryden favored regularity. So he used the classical techniques of regularity and the basic rules of composition. But he refused to worship these rules and to consider them as substitutes for real inspiration and intensity of expression. So these rules are rules set by a few people. And Dryden believed in the inspiration or an inborn talent, inborn creative power of the poet. And he says that it is not these rules and regulations that that can be substitutes, that can be substituted for inspiration and intensity of expression. Dryden did not follow the prevalent interpretation of three unities. Aristotle's three unities, you have studied that in Poetics, yes. And what does three unities say? That a plot should be single, right? Then what about time? Time of action should be 24 hours, right? And what about the place? The place should be the same anywhere. So Dryden was against it. He did not follow that prevalent interpretation of three unities. He favored using subplot into the main plot. Aristotle was against it. Okay, so he favored using subplot into the main plot, Dryden. He also states increasing the time frame and because that will allow greater maturity to the plot. He disregarded the unity of place as well. He considered it too rigorous, because what it does is it obstructs or destroys or stops the development of plot and character. Now let's look at Dryden's definition of tragedy. Now Dryden's definition of tragedy is the same as Aristotle's. An imitation of one entire great and probable action, not told but represented, which by moving in us fear and pity is conducive to the purging of those two emotions in our minds. Unquote. So the same definition of tragedy of Aristotle is what Dryden also follows. Dryden merely followed Aristotle and Horace in his remarks on the tragic hero and other characters in tragedy. He doesn't find any use of group characters called chorus. That's the only difference. He doesn't find any use of the group of characters called chorus in the Greek tragedy. Now next, let's look at his views on comedy. Dryden has not much to say about comedy. Following Aristotle, he calls it a representation of human life in inferior persons and low subjects. According to him, the first end of comedy is delight. The first thing of comedy is to delight, and instruction is just the secondary. The persons in comedy are of a lower quality. There is very little action, and the faults and vices are mostly about the youth, their stupidities and their vices and their faults and their weaknesses, and not just that, the frailties, weakness of human nature. They are not premeditated crimes. Dryden wanted English comedy to be more refined than it was. According to him, Ben Jonson had only specialized in humor, and what it lacked was wit, intelligence. What Dryden wanted in comedy was refined laughter, rather than just coerce one arising from the display of humors or eccentric traits in individuals. While in Comedy of Humors, the spectators laughed at the humorous character, in a comedy of wit, or a comedy of manners as it grew to be, they laughed with the witty one, the intellectual, humorous ones. So, English comedy was yet to develop, according to Dryden. He didn't have much to say about it. He said Ben Jonson's humor was good, but it lacked wit, and so was the others. He found a little trade or a little spark in Beaumont and Fletcher, but he wanted more to the comedy. English comedy was yet to develop. He wanted it to be a refined laughter than just simply making absolutely. It's not just about spectators laughing at foolishness, okay, but instead spectators laughing at something, a comedy of wit, rather than just mere actions. Then let's look at what he has to say about epic. Dryden favors the French critics in considering the epic superior to tragedy. So, according to Dryden, epic is superior to the tragedy. He asks, what virtue is there in a tragedy which is not contained in an epic poem? He stresses that the epic is certainly the greatest work of human nature. Aristotle had preferred the tragedy to epic. Regarding the visual appeal of tragedy, Dryden urges 3 points. What are the 3 points? That it is the actor's work as much as the poet's, so the poet alone cannot deserve credit for it, that the stage is handicapped to show many things, big armies for instance, in words. Okay, so it's not just the writer, but also the actor also has to go hand in hand. Okay, the writer writes it in words, the actor acts it out. Okay, or the poet writes it in words and the actor has to act it out. And that while we have leisure to digest what we read in the epic, we may miss many beauties of a play in the performance. Dryden disagrees with Aristotle again in insisting on a moral in the epic. He doesn't agree with, or he doesn't agree on using morality or moral in epic. Okay. Now, then he speaks about satire. Dryden keenly studied the satirical conditions or traditions of Rome, and he perfected the genre in his own capacity. And therefore, he became one of the greatest satirists of England. His own great satirist, Macflecknoe. And of course, his major satirical works were Absalom and Achitophel. And then you have Macflecknoe, a very hilarious and very satirical work, completely targeted against Thomas Shadwell. He observes that a satirist should make a man die sweetly rather than being butchered. He stood for a smooth, urbane satire that had unity of design. In other words, the satirist should choose one vice or folly for his target, as the epic poet chooses one character for his special praise and makes all others subservient to it. Just like that, the satirist should choose one vice or folly for his target, whoever he is targeting at, and he should make him die sweetly. Okay, just read McFlecknoe, you will understand what I'm trying to tell you. Dryden's judgments are sometimes, called cultural nationalism by George Watson. And that's it for Dryden. We will continue with the next critic, the Dr. Samuel Johnson, in the next video. So thank you and keep safe.